So what we do is we look at technology 10, 15 years into the future, and then we evaluate that technology. So we'll install it, as you see here, on different various pieces of equipment that we'll talk about, and we look at it on how does it work and what does it do. So we look at technology of solar. You'll pass some solar coming in. We look at battery storage technology, so being able to store energy as well. Microgrids, EVs. So you see an EV truck behind me. Smart home appliances that we have inside. And then what we'll actually talk about here is even solar water panels too.
Yeah, just as background, how all these kind of interesting how emerging technology comes together. The inventor and founder of this, a guy named Cody Friesen, which I assume you saw the Illumination article. Yeah. We first met him. His previous company was a battery company, so he invented a new type of battery, and I got to know him real well as part of that work. But that was all this emerging technology, and he one day, probably 6, 7 years ago, he said, "Mike, let me tell you about what else I'm working on." And so he's described this. I had spent some time in Africa and some other thorough. So when he described what he was doing, I said, "Hey, this could be pretty interesting. Let's see what we can do." And then it's taking it through, a condenser, and then it gets cooled off in another part of it, so then that water condenses out of it. So it's basically like the water cycle occurring. The rain, the condensation, the water evaporating back out is all occurring in here. So it's just using really it's driven by solar thermal. The solar PV generates electricity for all the internal. Again, the fan to draw the motors in. There's some, but if you look at the life of that, that's cheaper than buying bottled water. If you have good municipal drinking water or good out of a well, that's going to be cheaper. Now, some would say this is still a higher quality water. It's interesting, even though this is something you might use in a third world situation because they don't have access to any other water, it's still a premium water. So there's actually some places in Australia where they have this, where they have them at high-end restaurants, and they sell the water out of these in high-end containers, and so they're selling it because that's tasting water. I mean, because it's pure water, mineralized just right. So it's a premium water. So some people will, if you're spending money for premium water, this is actually the cheaper way of getting premium water. And yet it's the same water that you're using for the third world scenario where nobody has. So when you're solving the water problem, you're actually solving it with premium water that's as good as anybody in the world has.